Hello. Order. Right, well, I'm going to start off our session this afternoon in terms of the progress report that the Environmental Audit Select Committee is doing, and we're really looking at where we are with the environment and what the hopes are for the future in terms of environmental policy. And we're going to be presenting what we call our progress report to Parliament before we actually finish. But we just felt it was really important, if we look into the future, that we should make sure that we look at younger people and that the voice of young people is actually included in any recommendations that our committee might take. And I think one of the concerns that we have, and if any of you have just walked along the committee corridor just now, you will have seen that there's been a massive queue of people waiting to get into the Treasury Select Committee. And the Environment Committee or the Environmental Audit Select Committee doesn't always have that same degree of profile. And I think that our view is that in the future that is just going to have to change for the reasons which I suspect all of us would probably agree on. So what we really wanted to do was just to explore thinking about the future, about the environment, about future generations. And obviously the hearing that we're having this afternoon will inform the report that we have. I think we feel very privileged that we've got the 4 organisations that you each represent here this afternoon. And we know very well, that you're all doing key work in this field. And members of my committee will want to perhaps come in and ask certain questions of you. But what we'd like to do, first of all, is give each of you a couple of minutes just to perhaps give a sense of what your organisation is, why it's important, and what your priorities are for the work that you're currently doing for 2050, looking to the future, long after I will have been retired here from Parliament. So I don't know who wants to start. I think you're all looking to Jamie, but perhaps we start at the top and work down, shall we, Jamie?
Okay, I'm Jamie Agombar. I'm from the National Union of Students, NUS, which is a confederation of about 600 students' unions in the UK. And NUS is the national voice of students, as we call ourselves. We do quite a lot on sustainability these days. Traditionally, it was a very reactive approach, and we, operating a purchasing consortium, reacted to what students didn't like and tried to work with those companies. These days, we do a lot more proactively, so engaging students to help them green their students' unions, to help them green their institutions, and increasingly the communities as well. From a behaviour change focus, we've moved quite rapidly onto an institutional change focus. So we're trying to ensure that sustainability is not just about doing less bad on campus, not just about burning less fossil fuels or throwing more waste away. It's actually about embedding it into the core educational purpose, the teaching and learning, ensuring that students turn out as part of the solution to the problems that we face rather than just part of the problem. So we've got various programmes which we're working on to do that. I feel we're quite well placed to do it, and the reason we do it is because students want us to do it. There's a very clear student demand and a latent interest in sustainable development.
Right, thank you. And so if I turn next to Shay, Miah, member of the Hartlepool member of the Youth Parliament, the UK Youth Parliament.
Yes, my name is Shay. I'm from Hartlepool. I'm part of the Youth Parliament, which has over 3,000 young people involved in youth democracy. We are a voice for young people. In a group that we get elected as a member of Youth Parliament from each constituency, and we fight with, or we work with the government and the local authority to make change better for young people. What we're currently doing, we just had an election just a few weeks ago in the House of Commons for main debate of raising the wage, of the living wage, and mental health as well, to find things about that. But locally, what I'm doing is I'm working with the local authority to look at some ways to promote more recycling within schools and the education system itself, as they using that system there. With the young people, we've got a group of young people who are eager and committed to actually work to know more about the environment and what he has to do, and then we're going to work on that throughout the next year as well.
And can I just ask you how, being a member of the Youth Parliament for Hartlepool, how much you relate to what's going on in Hartlepool, or how much you relate to the wider work of the Youth Parliament?
Well, we always feedback once every month through a survey that we do, and the work that we do in Hartlepool keeps it local, but we try to get the national aims to the local standards, so everything falls back and goes back up as well.
Yeah, which is of course the struggle that every MP tries to balance.
Yes, indeed.
Right, Ryan, Bruce, you're part of the Speaker's scheme for traineeships.
Yes, I'm part of the Speaker's Parliamentary Placement Scheme, which was set up by Hazel Blears and the Speaker, basically to try and bring people who wouldn't have had the chance to get into the more traditional route of getting into politics the chance to work in Parliament. We don't have any specific sort of environmental remit, if you like, but we work across all political spectrums, and there's actually a member of this year's cohort working with Ed Davey, Energy Secretary, so he's obviously got a lot to do with energy policy. But I think schemes like the one I'm on and the House of Commons apprenticeship scheme are fantastic ways of bringing young people into politics and getting them engaged in a way that they might previously have felt was a bit more distant, nothing to do with them. So I think it's a fantastic scheme to be able to bring a different background into politics.
Right, and you're glad to be here?
I would, yes, eventually.
Would you say it's been transformational?
For me personally, yeah, it's been absolutely incredible. I had always wanted to get into politics, and sort of last year I'd kind of given up on the idea that I was ever going to get into politics. I thought, well, it's obviously not going to happen for me. I've not got millionaire parents, I can't do unpaid internships, and that sort of thing. And then one of my friends on my master's course said, have you seen this scheme? And I kind of thought, this is too good to be true. So I applied for that, got it, and here since October. Yeah, it's fantastic, yeah. Don't want to leave.
Okay, thank you. And Calin, My Life, My Say, that's your organisation. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that, please?
Of course. My Life, My Say is an organisation that aims at engaging young people into politics, but we act in a different way. We try and give a platform for the youth to voice their concerns, their hopes, their expectations. And often we hear the rhetoric that young people, they do not care about politics. And the truth is, young people do feel that disenfranchised. And as such, we act peer-to-peer. And we give them education, because we have a partnership with the UK Parliament and the EU Parliament. But we also give internships and the opportunity for young people to work with other young people in politics and regarding politics.
Right, thank you. Well, we're going to go on now and just ask some questions that we've got, but the way we'll run the proceedings is, you don't have to each answer every single question, but catch my eye, and members of the committee will catch my eye as well, and we'll conduct it as a discussion in that sense. But I think what we really wanted to have a sense of is the political priorities of young people. What are they? And how much do the political priorities of young people include concerns about the environment, about sustainability? And should more be being done, or just what's your perception of it, really? Calin.
We have just recently started a campaign called Be the Change. And this is regarding the elections. And one of the aspects of this campaign involves grassroots. So we talk to young people, we take photographs of them, and sometimes we ask them a simple question: what would you do if you were PM for a day? And the interesting thing doing this is that once I engage with people, once I start talking to them, they become really passionate. They have opinions about the environment, about education and healthcare and welfare. But almost every time, the first thing I'm told is, why does it matter what I think?
It's what, Shay?
What does it matter what I think?
Right.
A lot of young people feel that their opinions no longer matter. And even though they are highly opinionated, they hesitate to participate into politics because of that reason.
So it's the passion's there, but the question is how to connect.
Exactly.
And right, Calin, yes.
Yeah. Can I just come in on that? Because Calin, you used a really interesting word, probably very deliberately. You said that young people felt disenfranchised. That means they don't have the vote. But they do have the vote, and yet they're the cohort in society that least likely to vote, so 18 to 24-year-olds are the ones who use their vote least of all.
Yes, I am.
Why is that?
I am aware because this is the whole point of the Beat the Change campaign. One of the aspects is that we're trying to get people to vote. Now, it's just how can I say? With this question, it's dangerous going in circles. It's very dangerous because young people don't vote because they think they can't change anything. Now, they can't change anything because they don't vote, and it keeps going like that. And in a way, this started because if you look at Parliament, you see a lot of middle-aged white people, and that is not Britain's youth. So they don't feel represented anymore, and they hesitate to vote because they think, who am I voting for? But had they vote, now maybe would that change things? We don't know. That's what we're trying to change and see what the effect would be. What happens when more young people do vote?
Were you in any way involved in looking at what happened in Scotland in the referendum and the involvement of young people there?
We weren't, as an organisation, we weren't involved. I personally did follow the events, and I think that proves the point I made earlier about when young people are given the chance and when they feel that they can actually influence politics, they become very passionate about it.
Okay. Shay, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, so then to your question of why they are the least people to actually vote, but they've got no education behind politics. Yeah, come from the northeast of England, my town's Hartlepool, one of the deprived areas that you could call it, with 35% living in poverty. How can we actually give them the education when the education system doesn't have the political knowledge or the curriculum to actually put it in?
Yeah, that's definitely a problem in our country. Unlike other European countries, there's a nervousness about teaching children about party politics because there's a fear it might turn your heads. I think you'd be quite capable of deciding for yourselves, but that's definitely a problem.
Yes, indeed, but if we teach them the basics of what a Conservative is, what a Labour is, what Lib Dems, what the government does, at least they got some knowledge, and then they know how to register to vote.
Yeah. Can I just ask, I mean, many MPs, myself included, we arrange for people, young people, schools, to come down from our constituencies to actually visit the Commons, to actually be involved in the outreach programme. Is that something which you're familiar with, in terms of that being accessible to young people up in Hartlepool?
No, we're not, because when we organise trips, I would say, in schools and colleges, we pay for them ourselves, we go there with our own the money that we have with no knowledge if we can get into Parliament or things like that.
So would you say then that one of the lessons from that is the need for existing elected representatives, members of the European Parliament, members of this Parliament, and local elected councillors as well, to be connected to the Youth Parliament?
Yes, I think there should be not only Youth Parliament, but their residents and their young people. Because in my constituency, we don't see our MEP, we don't see our MP now come to our schools to talk to young people. There's nothing like that.
I mean, do they know about your existence?
I mean, which MP doesn't know about the existence of Youth Parliament? Pardon?
You've invited them?
Yes, we've invited them, but they don't come. They're either busy or they're doing something else. But the thing is, why should we invite them when they could just come over and tell us, yes, I'm interested here?
They can't just turn up at your school, no. They have to be invited because of this nervousness around turning people's minds politically. The MP or MEP has to have a formal invitation, usually through the head teacher or a form teacher.
Yeah, but all head teachers would be keen, but if only the MP showed an interest within the young people.
Okay, well, you're unlucky because I visit plenty of schools in my constituency.
Okay.
But an invitation.
Carol, I'm going to move on to Ryan.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to pick up on the point Mrs. Spellman made. Just to sort of jump to the defence of politicians. I think I'd absolutely agree with you that there is a disconnect between young people and politics, but I think who's failing who? Are we failing in politics, or is politics failing us? I think there's a bit of a need to meet in the middle there. Yes, politics is a hard sell to young people, but at the same time, if you're not going to engage with politics, then why should politicians? Because at the end of the day, politicians need votes, and if they're not going to vote, then why should politics engage them? So there's that catch-22 situation there. I was very lucky in that I became hugely interested in politics when I was younger. None of my family were very political. my grandfather was. He was very political, and he was completely opposite from my political views. We had wonderful debates, but that was just an anomaly on my part. Most of my friends think, oh, he's off on one again about whatever. But you mentioned the Scottish referendum, and I think that was a fantastic... Yeah. I was quite heavily involved in the No campaign up in Scotland, and it was a fantastic opportunity for young people because it was an issue that mattered to them. It was something that affected them personally. And the voting figures were something like 80 to 90% of young people voted in the referendum.
Okay, can I jump in? Why? I mean, I get that it was it was a fascinating and exciting thing, the referendum.
Yeah.
But it was no more important than an ordinary general election. I mean, choosing your government is massive.
Absolutely.
It may not be as dramatic as a breakaway of the United Kingdom, but it is a big deal for people.
I couldn't agree with you
more.
more.
The question is why? Why do the numbers dip so dramatically when it comes to kind of humdrum general election stuff, as compared with something like the referendum in Scotland? Because not humdrum in the sense that it doesn't catch people's imagination in that generation as
I think
much
that's
as
the
the
problem.
Scottish referendum did.
People do see it as, well, it's that group or it's that group, how does it affect me? And I think if it was made clear that these are the people that will make the decisions that affect your life. And I completely agree with you, education is absolutely where that has to start. And again, there is this worry that, oh, well, we can't influence them, we can't say, this is the way you should vote. But, you can say, as you said, this is what the Conservative Party stands for, this is what the Labour Party stands for, this is what your government does, this is what your MP does. And if you can get children interested in politics at a young age, and I think we were talking before about environmental issues, and if you can get children involved in that by exciting things, by things they respond to, fun things, then that'll stay with them, and that value system will go with them into secondary school, back into further education. But I think it has to start at a young age.
I'm going to bring Jamie in.
Well, I completely agree with Ryan that students certainly are interested in politics. They talk about politics a lot, but they're not necessarily interested in the politics that politicians talk about. So we know that students aren't that interested in, say, Europe. We do know that they're interested in climate change. In terms of voter turnout, I've got some stats here that it was 63% of 18 to 24-year-olds in 92, and it declined all the way until 2005, which was its low point of 37%, and then it went up slightly to 44% in 2010. And we're doing a bit of work with the Cabinet Office, along with other organisations, to try and get the youth vote out. But I do think that there's an important issue around how you start connecting and how you bring politics to life for young people by talking to them about their issues in their language. And we've seen quite a lot of opening up of politics of late, which undoubtedly will help. But there's also, I think, an intergenerational issue in that it's 76% of over 65s voted in the last election, and they're the ones who are, we hear in the media just this week, getting the good deal around continual benefits for their TV licence and bus passes and things. And actually, young people probably, because they don't vote, are getting a harder deal. There's a bit of a vicious circle in some respects.
Okay, well, sorry, yes.
On the point of getting young people involved in politics, we often think about it in terms of voting. But from my experience working with My Life, My Say and working close to politics in general, there are so many ways. Politics is so much more than just voting. And I've seen this personally in my university, where if I'm trying to engage with some of my colleagues to debate politics, not much happens. They're a bit hesitant. But if I say, oh look, my organisation is recruiting, we're working close to Parliament, we work into the aspects of politics, they show interest. So instead of, because there is a real problem, like you mentioned, talking to young people about politics because it feels like you're trying to manipulate them to vote with one party or another, why not we concentrate on voluntary work, on work experience, and on getting them actually engaged in politics, and then they can make their own decisions.
We do that. We do that.
But we've moved away from what we want to try and home in on, which is the environment. It's interesting that we've been talking about the democratic process, or not so much the democratic process, but the disengagement of with the democracy. But what we really wanted to try and do as well was just to look at where environment and sustainability actually feature within all of this.
I've got a couple of stats for you, if I may, just on that as well. So we work with DEC, and we do a tracker survey So we know that about 85% of students are either worried or very worried about climate change, and that's kind of consistent over the last 4 sets of data that we've done. But interestingly, climate change being an issue that they would vote on, the exact question is that they would vote for government that took more action on climate change. Has gone up. It's just 2 years ago it was 68%, and now it's at 82%. So there's a strong message that this is something that will get out the vote.
Yeah. Can I ask a follow-up question on that? Of course, well, do you think that is related to the fact that from primary school upwards, climate change is on the national curriculum? That compared to my generation, for whom the concept hadn't yet been mooted and certainly wasn't part of the curriculum, that children from a young age learn about the threat that climate change poses, so that actually compared to subsequent generations, their knowledge base is better?
Well, there certainly may be some truth in that. I mean, it wasn't an issue necessarily when you lot were at school because we didn't necessarily know about climate change then, but it's great that it is in the education system. I don't know how much it's in the secondary education system, so I meet quite a lot of students that don't know much about climate change. But I think it's good that it's in the media. Obviously, there's been a big downturn in the amount that it's been covered. We know that young people very often follow the media in terms of their perceptions and their concerns. But I think coming back to my generation issue again, the reason they're concerned about it is because they're the ones who are going to inherit the problems. So it's their generation that's got a massive carbon headache, no money to address the problem. It's kind of not wanting to polarise the debate, but it feels that young people are getting quite a hard deal, and climate change is right at the forefront of their concerns for that reason.
Can I just probe a bit on this question, because it's interesting. So I have 3 children, so I've seen them go the whole way through the educational system. Climate change is certainly taught in the relevant scientific subjects. If you're a geographer, you've definitely got climate change right the way up through secondary education. But could the problem be that the specialisation in secondary education means that if you don't take any subject for which the climate change is an integral part of that subject, let's say you did, like me, languages, actually you would miss out on follow-up on an important subject like that? Is that one of the problems? So did you, all 4 of you, did you not get taught about climate change at secondary school? And if you were taught about it, what were you studying?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there when you say that unless you take certain subjects, you're not going to get exposed to things like climate change.
Yeah.
But again, I completely agree with you. Is this feeling that we're going to be the ones left to deal with the problem? So I think, again, if we had something in the curriculum that was specifically about climate change and not a module in your geography lesson, then it could be something that we could push far harder.
So am I reading you right that you're saying that citizenship itself should be part of the curriculum in some way? And that within that, environmental issues, but not just climate change, but wider sustainability issues? Sorry, Simon, I'm jumping a bit on your question there.
Yeah, it should be. I think it should be. In primary school in Hartlepool, we have all schools are eco-friendly. Like all primary schools are eco-friendly, and 20% of them are forest schools as well. So they have their trees grown, and the local authority has invested millions of pounds within that school to have a forest school as well. So we got a forest school, but then when you go to secondary school, the only subject that actually teaches you about the climate change and the environment is geography. The citizenship doesn't teach you about climate change or politics, whatever it needs to be, because young people feel, because there isn't an exam at the end of the citizenship course, what they call it, they don't feel like it's important. So therefore it's disregarded as just a free 1 hour lesson.
Okay, Calin was going to come in.
Yes, I think education about climate change and citizenship, for instance, is just the first step. It's very important, but what's also important is that young people have very easy access to then actually get engaged in that subject. For example, from experience in my home country, Romania, people who do voluntary work there, they always do things as climate change, recycling and encouraging. So when you study geography, you first learn about it. But if you're not encouraged to go forward, and then you get the voluntary work and teachers saying to you, look, this is a brilliant opportunity for you to get work experience and voluntary and something to put on your CV, and then they get involved in this, and actually doing increases their passion, and then they get very passionate about the subject, and once they finish that, they will continually pursue that route.
Okay, Jamie, you wanted to...
I was just going to draw out the difference really between knowledge, skills and understanding and attitudes and values. And I know that a lot of attitudes and values may well be developed during a time in college or university rather than necessarily in primary and secondary school. But actually, there's lots of different things that we need from young people as they leave these institutions and go into positions of authority. And it's more than just knowing what climate change is. They've got to know, they've got to have a global citizenship perspective. They've got to be able to think about things critically, critical thinking. They've got to think about things from a different discipline, interdisciplinary manner. And that's all stuff that is quite difficult even for institutions like universities to do, because it's not their role really to teach what to think or how to think it. It's their role to impart the knowledge and the skills. So I think there's a big, strong role for the informal curriculum, as we would call it, the stuff that happens outside the classroom. We're doing an interesting programme at the Students' Green Fund, which is funded by HEFCE, trying to do a lot more on the informal curriculum and trying to join it up and enable some of the stuff on the formal curriculum. But I would also say that I think, picking up on your point, Caroline, about the different forms of education, and from the young people I talk to, there isn't necessarily much of a continuity. They can get quite a bit at the eco-school, then they might not get much in secondary depending on what they've studied, and then they might get quite a bit, or indeed not quite a bit, in tertiary education. And having looked at what happens overseas, other governments seem to have better strategies around education for sustainable development generally, and weave it through the forms of education. And of course we've got the principle of academic freedom, so we can't tell universities what to teach, but there's ways of enabling it, such as things like our Students' Green Fund. And it just doesn't seem to be that joined up continuity approach to sustainable development, which I think means that many young people miss out on whether it's the skills or the attitudes and the values.
Can I just mention, you mentioned HEFCE. Is there anything in terms of the Green Fund? I mean, are there a series of recommendations that should be made to HEFCE that would actually make this a lot easier?
Not yet. I mean, we're in year 2, we're delivering year 2, and we've funded 25 projects which are at the transformational end of the spectrum. And we're currently talking to HEFCE about a second round of funding, because we think it has been so transformational. But it's that sort of work that bridges the formal and the informal curriculum and enables students to have the space to think about these issues and to explore them, and to develop networks, to challenge what's going on, to challenge their institutions. That's quite important. So this isn't just the curriculum issue, because we all know the curriculum can be well taught, if taught at all. But actually it's the point you made outside was about having good teachers as well, which is really important. But actually, regardless of all that, whether you're lucky enough to have it taught to you in a good way that you understand, there's still all the important stuff that happens outside, which is the arena that we're into with the Students' Green Fund.
Okay, just going to finally ask each of you to make out a kind of wish list. 5 things in order of importance that the government that's going to be elected in May should be doing as far as the environment is concerned for the next 5-year period. What's those 5 things on your list of things to be done?
I think there should be more initiatives for businesses and organisations to actually go locally rather than nationally. Tell organisations, if you cut down on your carbon emissions, we'll give you like a tax refund, something like that. Because in Hartlepool we have a nuclear power station. We generate £33 million in the local authority, and it gives 45,000. The average wage is £45,000, which they invest back into the local authority. So with that, by investing, and as a region we have over 1,400 organisations or businesses that actually do these stuff as well. I've got some statistics here they employ over 10,000 people with this, they generate £26 billion per year. Together they comprise 50% of the UK's petrochemicals. GBD. So therefore we could see the money that is there and actually generates back to the local authority, to the government and to the GDP. So we should be telling
that's
businesses.
one, so four more.
Go for it.
I think personally we need to start taking a leading role in renewable energy. I mean, particularly coming from Scotland, my brother works in an estate where there's huge wind farms. You know, we're an island, we can lead the way on wave power, not so much on solar power in Britain maybe, but we haven't been able in a lot of places in Britain to recover from the traditional industries that have fallen away. And I think even looking at including sustainability into the economy, that's a fantastic way of bringing back jobs, bringing back revenue for the exchequer, is for Britain to take a leading stance on renewable energy, like, as I say, wind power, solar power, wave power.
So that's at the local level?
I think at the local level, at the national level as well. I mean, there was a report done a few years ago saying that places like the Clyde and Dundee and places like Bristol, where they've got shipyards lying empty, are perfectly placed, those shipyards, to be making peripherals for wind turbines and things. So, again, there seems to be this thing where there's no connection between the economy and the environment. Well, that's obviously rubbish. There is a connection. There's huge amounts of revenue to be generated from sustainable projects.
Two.
Yes, I totally agree with that. Although there are issues with renewable energy because the existing fossil fuel industry will not give up easily. But my first point would be that it's most important to concentrate on a national and local level. Although climate change is a global issue, if one country does everything it can and overnight, ideally, in a hypothetical scenario, becomes totally eco-friendly, the effects of climate change will still impact that country. And I think what the first step of the new government should be is that it should adapt to climate change. We've seen in late 2013 and early 2014 with the floods in Britain. And the budget for climate change adaptation, instead of being used to prepare for such events, it got increased after the floods.
I'm just going to cut you short there because we've got the Climate Change Act and we have the Climate Change Committee, Adaptation Subcommittee. I'm just really wanting just to have your kind of big vision, just very briefly, just a list, then we'll kind of come on and delve a little bit more in detail. But making a reality of the climate change commitments really is, yes.
And also to basically prepare for the impacts of climate change, because at the moment most of the budget is being used on repairs. So an anomaly happens and then you have to repair. And I remember reading this report by an EU Commission that said for every €1 spent in preparation, you can save up to €6 spent in repairs. And that's only considering flood damages.
Right, so adaptation over and above repair. Okay, thank you. Jamie?
Am I allowed one? Is that
yes. You can do 5 quick ones if you want.
Oh, all right, okay. I'll be really brief, but I think something around education and sustainable development, coming up with a strategy to ensure that a sustainable development is woven through the formal and informal curriculum at all different levels would be important. It's a really interesting analogy that the average age of the team that sent man to the moon was 28. According to the literature, it's because President Eisenhower had the National Defence Education Act. So basically they saw this was a big issue that they wanted to do in response to Sputnik. They invested in education and they achieved amazing things with young people. And actually, if we were to do something like that around climate change or indeed sustainable development, it makes you wonder what could be achieved. So I think some sort of national interest in education and sustainable development would probably be my preference. But I also think that Paris next year, leadership on that is really important. We are world leading in terms of Climate Change Act. I don't necessarily think we're world leading in terms of what we're doing now, but I think it's important that we go there and ensure that we get a strong outcome.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn next to Simon Wright.
Thank you. I would like to go back to education. I'm just going to read something. The expert panel for the Government for the National Curriculum a couple of years ago recommended that the school curriculum should develop pupils' knowledge, understanding, skills and attitudes to satisfy economic, cultural, social, personal and environmental goals, including the aim to promote understanding of sustainability in the stewardship of resources locally, nationally and globally. That recommendation wasn't taken forward, and as a result, there's not much about sustainable development in the curriculum. Jamie, you said that it's not just about the curriculum, but would you consider that the government should review that recommendation next time the curriculum is addressed?
Definitely.
And one of the issues facing schools is that there is a long list of things that they should be teaching. Is this a priority for what schools should be teaching, given other competing priorities and interests that are there and could be there in the national curriculum? I just wonder, from a sense of priority, how important is environment and sustainable development in what schools should be teaching young people?
I think the priority of environment within the young people is low. That's what I think. And I think they've got more important things to worry about, such as jobs, education, going to the work world, getting all these stuff. And I don't think environment affects them as much as everything else does. So I think, but it's that thing that once we put in the curriculum, it makes people passionate, gets them involved, and that's what we need to do, is to get them involved, passionate, and hopefully that will go further.
The UK Youth Parliament, Shay, I know, has debated a curriculum for life within which you call for a sustainable living to be part of that. Can you just elaborate a bit on what that might mean, and would that address the issue where some young people taking certain subjects would get no information?
The curriculum for life, the sustainable living part, where the curriculum for life was, in fact, to allow schools to teach young people about the future, about giving them the life experience that they need for the world of work, whether you have to leave school, find a job, or go to college and university. The sustainable living part is to show them how they can be cost efficient, live in a home which is warm and comfortable for them, but they can reduce how they can use eco-friendly light to equalise to actually reduce their bills and cost bills. And that's how it should be. And then that comes into geography, and that hopefully with that, then the curriculum of citizenship becomes more important, becomes more worthy for young people to actually understand with. And then it goes into geography, history, and then you will elaborate in every subject, I believe.
Any further?
Just to add, I mean, we've just done a bit of research with students in tertiary education, and the priority concern for them in relation to the election is cost of living, and then it's employment, and further down the list, about 45% is sustainability and climate change. So we know, I mean, we're quite frank that this isn't the priority, but actually, if you look at the bigger picture priorities, we actually find that students' concern in relation to things like climate change increases as they go through their time in university as well. So as the education kicks in, they realise that this is a bigger priority. But it's the bigger picture is that we need a sustainable and viable planet, and that sort of trumps any sort of short-term issues that are around, arguably. And students kind of argue that point as they go through their education.
And how early do you think children can start to engage with issues of sustainable living and sustainable development? Is there a sort of particular age where this might start to factor into education most helpfully?
I was going to say, I think a very young age. I mean, I've got a 7-year-old nephew who, they go off and do. They go into local forests and that kind of thing. And he came home from school once and started telling me about carbon emissions. And I was flabbergasted at that. And he was telling me things that I would expect like PhD people talking about.
Yeah.
So I think if you can get them involved at a really young age by doing things they don't feel like they're being educated. The day out of the classroom, they get to go away and do something, and then they come back and they learn, but they take that value on with them, and they get more and more interested in it. But if you don't instill that into them at a young age, then trying to make them interested at high school, it's forcing the issue, I think, at that point.
The RSPB's done some good work on connection to nature, and that's an issue of concern to them. There's sort of evidence that young people are not as connected to nature these days with tablets and digital technology. And actually that's how I got into sustainability. It wasn't through anything a teacher taught me. It's that my dad used to take me out to nature reserves, and I kind of, I got into it that way. So eco schools and forest schools are great for that reason. And the earlier you start with that sort of stuff, the better. And then embedding it, some of the critical challenging issues around climate change or circular economy, all that sort of stuff needs to come later once they've developed those important values and those attitudes.
If there are no further questions on education, perhaps I should move on to youth participation. And I just wonder what thoughts you have on how government can more effectively engage with young people to influence its policy making. I mean, what more can we do to make youth participation and engagement effective and change policy as a result?
I think things like this are a fantastic way of bringing young people into politics. Invite them to things like select committees to hear their views, because then they'll feel they are being listened to, that MPs do care. That I don't always think it's helpful to think that young people have completely different opinions from everyone else. I mean, I think by and large most young people's biggest concern is the economy just now. They do care about the NHS. So I think things like this, things like the placement I'm on, the Speaker's Parliamentary Placement Scheme, the House of Commons Apprenticeship Scheme, but also even political parties, just going out and knocking on doors thing. I think if you can get them engaged in a way that they haven't been before and show them that it's not just a bunch of middle-aged white men making the decisions, then they will start to care more.
I think things like this are really important, but as well, and it goes slightly back into education, but not quite, but allowing teachers to tell their students, look, you could do this, you can have this voluntary work. Because inviting people on a select committee, it would be young people, it would be a certain part of the larger group of, sorry, my emotions, of the number of people. I live in North London, and something quite strange happened a few weeks ago where I saw an event that was really close to being actual gang work. And I thought, this is quite strange. And I think this would be an important group of society to target, the young people who drop out, the young people who feel that life's not fair to them, and give them the opportunity to do voluntary work and target them directly.
Do you have any thoughts on the effectiveness of government departments in talking to each other about how their policy development may affect young people? So as a committee we look at a whole range of government departments. When you look at sustainable development, environmental issues, there are lots of government departments, whether it's Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Department for Climate Change, Department for Transport. There are a lot of departments that just as they have an impact on environmental policy in the broader sense, so their policies impact on young people as well, and sometimes that cross-departmental working for young people. Do you get any sense of whether that's done, or whether it's done effectively or supportively?
Well, I haven't done much research, but I can tell you from what I see on a daily basis, and it doesn't seem so. I do not deny that maybe the infrastructure is there, the opportunities might be there, but I do get the feeling that young people find it hard to find these opportunities. So maybe this platform that offers them should be made more, let's say, user-friendly.
Martin, do you want to come in on education?
Yes, can I just, following on from what Simon's just asked, thinking specifically about sustainable development, are you confident that the different government departments are cooperating to take us forward on sustainable development, or are there some failings that just failure to coordinate?
If I may, they've got a few examples of where I think departments haven't worked very well. So I was lucky enough to go to Japan for the UN's UNESCO's ESD end of decade for Education for Sustainable Development conference, and there wasn't a UK delegation there. And it's really important in terms of climate change and some of the stuff that DEFRA's doing that there was a UK delegation there. But obviously, I think we asked the question, and I think they decided either it wasn't an organisational or a governmental priority, but I think there was also some debate about who would go from the nations, who would represent the UK. And the result was that nobody went. I think that's a real missed trick, because you had great leadership from the Japanese government, you had all the other governments there, people being inspired about this action and thinking what they're going to do as part of the new Global Action Programme. But another example is we've done quite a lot. We've published a report called Homes Fit for Study, and where we're linking sort of the welfare issues of cold homes with energy efficiency. And the new 2018 regulations that mean you can't let out a really badly inefficient home, there's certain exclusions for homes of multiple occupation, and the Department for Local Government, Communities and Local Government, won't change, as far as we understand, that loophole, which means that a lot of the homes which students rent will still be very energy efficient after 2018. And that's clearly, my understanding is that DEC want that to change, and that's not actually happening. I think there's quite a lot of examples, if you look around, about how government works in silos. And one thing that I've heard a few NGOs talk about is whether there's an opportunity to create a bit like the Office for Fiscal Responsibility, an Office for Environmental Responsibility, that sort of has an impartial view. Okay, right, yeah. So I think there's some merit in that, just to bring people together and to overview how the interactions happen.
Assuming that we can overcome the coordination failures, what more should the government be doing to promote sustainable development?
I think Britain could take a leading role on this, because I think if countries like Britain, for want of a better phrase, the bigger countries, can take a leading role in this kind of thing, then the rest will follow. I do worry that Britain is fantastic at promoting these kind of things abroad, but not as good at doing it domestically. We do have a kind of attitude of do as we say, not as we do. So I think we have to start working on programmes locally, at a local regional level, to get sustainable projects off the ground, and perhaps given sort of tax rebates for that kind of thing, incentives for that sort of thing. I think, again, it comes back to what you were saying about work experience and things. A lot of kids, they might not particularly want to do a sustainable thing, but if you turn around and say to them, this would be great on your CV, that kind of thing, then we can promote programmes like that. But I think we don't have, certainly I've heard of, many programmes for sustainability.
And like you said, this can become a market. So bringing in renewable sources of energy, that creates jobs. And of course, the government has to tackle very carefully the issue not to challenge fossil fuels. But also a different point that Britain can actually lead, and I think it does and it should continue, is research in the area of climate change. I mean, we're talking here of a nation that has both Oxford and Cambridge and many, many other educational institutions that are top. And by encouraging research, then you create a pool of ideas from which not only can the UK take and put them into practice without waiting on the world to act, and it can take unilateral action and say, okay, let's try this, let's try wind farms in Scotland, let's see how that works. But also then, with this pool of ideas, other nations can take from them and see and apply them, because this is actually a global issue.
I'm going to step back, if you don't mind, just to go back to something which I don't think we nailed at the beginning. And now, we are a committee that is united by a concern for the broader environmental agenda. That's why we're on this committee. So we don't just want young people to flex their political muscles. We need you to, because that's what resonates in Parliament. That's what resonates with government. And you put your finger on, you gave us the data earlier about how much interest young people have in the environment. You've just told us how few young people engage in elections, who actually vote. And the effect is that collectively, we are not hearing that demand from young people. And if we did hear that demand, then politics would respond to it, just as it has done to the elderly component of society. So I just want to try and understand what needs to be done to overcome this sense that young people have that there is no point voting because nothing ever changes. Because it is a fact, a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's such a demoralizing concept, but it's so prevalent, it's so dominant today. So what needs to happen to make young people realize that actually that's not true, that if they were to flex their muscles politically, things would change? It is a consequence of democracy. What is the biggest barrier that we need to overcome?
I think it's perception. People have a perception of this place has been closed off from them. I think the Inside the Commons documentary that's on just now has been a fantastic thing. A lot of people are talking about that. But one of the things that really resonated during the Scottish referendum campaign was social media. It was used by both sides massively to get their point across. And it had its flaws. You know, the problem with social media is anybody can say anything they like. And it's not like putting it in a newspaper where someone can come back and say, well, that's not true, that's libelous. But I think if we can safely utilise social media, it's that sort of thing that will engage young people in politics. There's things now on sort of Facebook and Twitter that you have.
But then
things.
logically, sorry to interrupt, then logically, because we've had this explosion in social media now, logically we could expect then a much higher turnout at the next election in May from young people. But I'm not convinced that's going to happen. That doesn't seem to be what the polls and the
Young people don't trust politicians. It's the same thing. Young people don't trust politicians, neither do adults trust politicians. We had Liberal Democrats.
I'm going to interrupt you as well, just because I think there's an acceptance there. I think people know what. Sound arrogant in a sense, but there is a basic understanding of what young people think about politicians. We get that all the time. I'm doing an assembly tomorrow morning. I'll be talking to 6 formers straight after. I'm talking to 4 groups of young people tomorrow, and I know, and I do this week in, week out. I have a reasonable idea of the dislike people have for politicians, the way we operate here. I think we know that, but that's even more reason for people to get involved in politics. If the world's perfect, why bother voting? If there's a problem, you vote to change things. So my question to you is not what do young people think of politicians. I know that, more or less. It's what needs to happen to persuade young people that they're wrong about the pointlessness and futility of voting. What do you need to do to persuade them that they are duty-bound if they want to change the world to go out and engage and vote? That's the question.
The next government then should give something back to the young people. It can be on sustainability, it can be on education, it can be on welfare. Doesn't matter. The young people need to see something given back to them, especially after the last election, when the Lib Dems promised no tuition fees, and that didn't happen. And I think An Idiot's Guide to Politics by the BBC nailed the proposition. It said, because it showed that a lot of young people feel that we were told it's changing. We were told that politicians will keep their promise. We were told tuition fees, and that didn't happen. And I think it's critical that the next government, regardless of the government, gives something back to the youth. So then the youth sees, look, they are tackling us, so we should get involved.
I tend to disagree with that. I think programmes like An Idiot's Guide to Politics and The Revolution Will Be Televised and things, I don't think they help at all. I think they do paint politicians as bumbling idiots. As idiots that don't care. That since working here in October, and I'm not trying to be flattering here at all, the work that MPs do is incredible.
We all know that.
But I think that's what needs to be put across.
But who's got the interest in putting that across?
I think there's going to be a carrot and stick approach, to be honest. I think you're right, young people do need something back, but I think this next election is going to send a shockwave through young people in that actually I could have used my vote and I could have prevented this. I think there's going to be a stalemate at the next election, and it's going to be awful for everybody, including young people. And I think that actually might be the kick at the backside, that young people need to say, well, actually my vote does count. I could have changed this and I didn't. But I genuinely don't think programmes like The Revolution Will Be Televised and An Idiot's Guide to Politics help at all.
Okay. Jamie, I think you wanted to come in.
I think what we need is some leadership. So we saw before the last election, David Cameron out with the Huskies and all this sort of stuff, and it seemed that that politicians were really getting this, and that they were going to champion it. And then after the election, we didn't really see a lot. And in fairness, we haven't seen much until the statement a few weeks ago that they're back interested in it, which cynically is because the election's coming. I agree, it's a trust issue. But actually, from a young person's perspective, we just need some leadership. We just need some people who are going to champion this, because we know, I mentioned the stats earlier, young people want to vote for parties that take sustainability seriously. They're worried about climate change. It's their future. They've got to pick up the problems if it's not addressed soon. They just the other point is around business lobbies as well, and I think there's some scepticism, not just about politicians not keeping to their word, but actually that politicians have undue influence from fossil fuel industries and the like, and I think they feel that's quite unfair, and they're worried about that. I don't think they think it's a level playing field. So in terms of their voice not being heard, their vote not counting.
I saw my question probably sounded very frustrated, but I know that if 100% of young people voted, as opposed to whatever the figure is today, I know that climate change and the environment will be way up the political agenda. So it works both ways. So the frustration that young people feel, I feel it very strongly. So I know our job as a committee would be so much easier if young people...
That's absolutely what I think. I think there has to be this meet in the middle. I do feel that young people, I include myself in that, my friends, my generation, do think everything should come to them. The politicians should come to them and give them everything, but there has to be this meet in the middle. It can't, like I said before, who's failing who? You know, if there are people in Syria right now who are, you know, younger than me, teens who are picking up rifles for the right that we get at 18 years old. It's just given to us. And I think if you don't exercise that, and I don't think making voting mandatory would help at all.
Totally.
But I just think that it's something that's so valuable. I've always voted. And it's not even just about voting, like you say. I think it's about engaging in politics at any level you can. It doesn't have to be about voting. You can go into the ballot paper and cross it off if you don't want to vote for anything.
I need to make this point again, and I'm sorry for this, but I'll make a reference to Romania. But when people feel they can change something, they will vote. They will, like in my case, I voted in the Romanian elections from here in London, and that meant spending 10 hours in a queue. But I knew that my vote and the vote of all of those people in that queue could influence that election. And it's that feeling that we need to give back to the youth. My Life, My Say is doing, part of the Be The Change campaign, is doing a manifesto report, which is going to be different. We're collecting ideas from young people, saying what would they do, what would they want to see in the next government, making a report, and then we want to hand that to the next government. Now, it's critical that if we can go back to the people we've asked for these ideas and say, look, we've given them the report and look what they've done. They've listened to this, they've listened to this, so we see the change. And then those people will feel engaged and become more engaged. But can you imagine how frustrating it would be if we give the report and then nothing changes? Nothing on that report gets tackled. All of the people that worked with it, all of the people that send their ideas, they will just go, what was the point? And that is the issue that needs to be tackled. And maybe a bit more, and if it is tackled, we need a lot of transparency so we can see it's tackled.
Okay, Jamie?
Just to say that we're strong supporter of votes for 16 as well. I think the earlier you get people voting, the more likely they are to participate.
So the more likely they are to
participate. It'd be quite an empowering thing, we think.
It was one of those citizens. I actually was very strongly opposed, not very strongly, I was opposed to that. And I was challenged by a group of students, aged 15 and 16, and they came to my office, and I was defenceless. I didn't have a single argument to take them on. And there and then I did a U-turn on the issue. Simply because my arguments were not standing up. I have to apologise. No disrespect to you, but I have to go, I'm afraid. I've got another meeting. Sorry, Chair.
We're always in three places at one and the same time, because as Ryan says, we are so busy. Martin, do you want to tie up on your...
No, I'm fine.
You fine.
Okay.
I'll turn to Carol.
So SDGs, now I know none of you are from the British Youth Council, so you can't kind of answer for them, but in our briefing pack we've got evidence from the British Youth Council, which is actually very critical of the engagement of the government in preparation before and during the Rio Plus 20 conference. But actually, having been Secretary of State at the time, there was quite a significant delegation of young people in Rio. Not necessarily from the British Youth Council, this is true, but one of the problems, I think, is there may be a proliferation of different youth organisations, and I think that maybe, do you think that to get better participation in international summitry, there could be a way of building an alliance of youth organisations, so the negotiator could hear clearly your voice. Do you think there is a way? The Girl Guides, for example, organised a parallel conference in Rio and funded the guides to go out to Rio. We certainly invited them to all our briefings and discussions and onto the stands with the business people at exactly the same time, had equal access. It can be done, but is it maybe to do with the fact there's lots of different organisations involved in this? I don't know if perhaps the NUS has a view.
Well, yes, on that actually. I mentioned earlier, we survey students regularly, and over the last 4 years with the Higher Education Academy, we've surveyed about 30,000 students, and consistently 60% of them want to learn about sustainable development. This is first year students.
Good.
And 80% to 85% want their institution to embed it.
Yeah.
But we're kind of frustrated because that helped lever this £5 million from HEFCE for the Students' Green Fund. Kind of frustrated that that's just a UK story. It's just about our 2.3 million students in higher education, but globally there's 135 or so million students in HE. So I'm not sure that, because other organisations such as ours, the NUS in France or NUS in Canada, do survey, but they use different questions. So there's no parity, so we can't actually say young people or students want this. As a result, we're forming an organisation called SOS, which is Students Organising for Sustainability, and it's not actually going to be an organisation. It's going to be an informal alliance. So we won't need funding, we won't need policy and things, but it's just a way of getting us to talk with other NUSs and other student-led groups, so that we can collaborate on research campaigns and communications. And the view is that we can then go to the EU or the UN. And let them know what we think of, say, the SDGs, and let them know what students want, and hopefully it will become quite a powerful voice.
Yeah, that's good.
So we've progressed quite rapidly with that. We've contacted about 70 organisations across all the different continents, and we hope to launch it in partnership with the Eden Project in October.
That's very good to hear.
Just, if I may cut on that, elaborate on the funding for that.
Yes, well, we haven't got any funding for it actually, but we
Which
did
is quite
approach.
important.
It is quite important. We approached DFID because we linked it into the SDGs. We had some initial discussions there, and it comes back to my point around it's all very good having the SDGs, but unless you link it into education, unless you engage young people in the development and then the delivery of it, and coming back to my point around critical challenge and engagement as well, then they're fairly meaningless to young people. They will just become something that the best they know about and learn about. Are not actively engaged in or involved in. So we hope SOS will become a dynamic way of us talking more, both within the UK, and we already talk as organisations in many instances, but actually internationally.
And the timing of that, the creation of the alliance, couldn't be better, because it's just on the eve of the Paris talks. Because certainly the approach the government took to Rio Plus 20 was to build a multi-stakeholder group before we went to Rio, with NGOs, with businesses, with youth groups, with anyone we thought had a locus on the subject, and to prepare what our line should be. And I would imagine that DEC will be doing the same thing in preparation for Paris. And if it's not, you could suggest it, because it's a method that's quite effective for operating as a country in an international environment. Your timing of your alliance couldn't be better.
Well, I think that's where, in a way, the role of this committee comes in, because we see what's happening with DFID, we see what's happening with DEC, we see what's happening with DEFRA, but going back to what was initially said at the outset about young people not having any sense of being able to be listened to or making a difference, so why vote? This is part of the process of how the Sustainable Development Goals will go forward. And if there's no funding for that part of the process, and I know because personally I was actually aware of the discussions that were going on with DFID, then I think it's something which this committee needs to look at as much as you're looking at it as well. Because, no disrespect to anybody here, a recommendation from a select committee backing up what should happen is just as important.
So I think you've got copies of the 17 proposed goals at the moment, and it would be really interesting to hear from you what you think the government could do to engage people at this stage of the process. They haven't been agreed upon. the Secretary-General said at the end of last year, we're at a historic crossroads and the directions we take will determine whether we succeed or fail on our promises, which will in turn impact your generation even more than mine. So what more could we be doing at this stage of the process to make sure your voice is heard? And do you have views about the 17?
Well, for a start, this is the first time I'd heard of the student, so I don't think they've been really well publicised. Perhaps they have been in sort of dusty tomes somewhere, which is fair enough. But I think it all comes back to getting information out there. Because having read the 17 goals, there's not one of them I disagree with. I think they're all fantastic aims, and then there's 169 other points from that.
Finer points.
But I think it comes back to getting the information out there. So, and again, it comes back to engaging with politics. If this is the kind of thing, if environmental sustainability is the kind of thing you're interested in, this should be the kind of thing that's out there for you to be able to see and, again, contact your MP, contact the Secretary of State and ask about it.
And there's two ways you can do this, directly and indirectly.
Yep.
So you do it indirectly through your elected representative, which is why you need to be enfranchised and why you need to vote. That's the person who's going to make the decision at the table. One of the interesting criticisms in the briefing note is, or questions, is, why can't there be a youth member of the negotiating team? And actually the Girl Guides asked me that question in Rio. One of the difficulty in international summitry is you have one politician whose job it is to negotiate and one senior civil servant. And so that is actually quite difficult. But I don't think that precludes other models of having young people in the wider team. That's something I think you could be pressing for.
Absolutely, yeah. But I do think as well that when you make a point of saying, we need to have a young person on us, it kind of makes them feel like they're just there for the sake of being there.
That's not desirable.
Whereas if you just invited someone to be a part of the panel or to be a part of your team that's at that summit, instead of saying you're here to represent youth, just say you're here because we want your views. I do think sometimes people think if they're invited as the youth representative, then their views are going to be carefully listened to and then ignored later on. So I think it's just about including them at the same level as you would include everybody else.
Yeah. Same thing happens, by the way, for women.
Absolutely,
You're often invited to be the token woman, and it's very irritating,
exactly.
Actually. It's the same issue. Sorry, I cut across Jamie.
I was just going to say, we haven't formally been consulted on them as well as the UK's largest youth-led organisation, but we've informally looked at them, and I know I've fed into this committee before on that. But it's the sort of thing exactly what we'd like SOS, Students Organising for Sustainability, to be able to do. So actually to look at this and to critically challenge it and publicise what we like about it and what we don't like about it, almost as a twin-track process to the formal process.
Yeah.
So do young people of the world think that this is enough? Because it's all very good us giving you our comments here in the UK, but a young person in Nigeria or a young person in Brazil will have very different viewpoints on this sort of stuff.
Indeed.
You would hope that that the people who are consulting on it have done a better job in those countries than they have done here, and you'd hope that the NUS equivalents or the organisation equivalents had also been consulted. But I'm unclear as to what the formal process was and how they decided who to reach out to.
So one of the interesting things is, we have to cast our minds back a bit, so there was a very pessimistic view that anything would be achieved at Rio at all. Right, so that was coming off an incredibly low base. And when the stakeholder group was brought together, NGOs, businesses, different societal groups came together, we brought them together in the city, that pessimism tended to pervade the room. But from Colombia emerged the best idea, which was the Sustainable Development Goals. Nobody else had a better idea for a good outcome from the summit. And we as a multi-stakeholder group made that decision to throw our weight as the United Kingdom behind the SDGs. But another illustration for you of what youth participation in summitry can achieve is that some of the businesses in this country that really take sustainability to their heart were pushing for corporate accounting for sustainability, and for that to be one of the main things for the UK to push for. It's not done anywhere in the world. It would be a first. And actually, the UK managed to get that into the agreement. So that's an illustration for you of how, if you can get young people's participation in the stakeholder engagement before a summit, before the die is cast on what will be achieved, then you can help to shape the outcome. I have to say that most of the media had pre-written nothing will be achieved at Rio Plus 20. But actually, the SDGs are a really significant outcome emanating from comparatively small Latin American country that eventually 193 countries decided to back the best idea. That was the background to it.
And I think that the issue there is the process. And certainly Colombia, because I know from meetings that there were with Colombia, they put a huge amount of effort into actually preparing what they wanted to take to that conference table at that summit. So I suppose really what we're looking to see is how we can get more young people involved in the process at whatever stage or level in it, but for it to be from the very beginning to the delivery of something, or the agreement, and then post that the delivery of it, which goes back to the point about involvement in decision making.
I think a very good way is, and it would be a bit easier for the government, is that it creates a, let's say, committee, a board of people, and then this board has to get the views of young people. And then the board can work with different organisations, and then the organisations themselves go by and get the opinions of young people. So you've got layers and layers. And so you get the ideas as the first core layer through the organisations. The organisations sum up the best ideas, and then this keeps going through and through. And so you come up with the best, and from a large group of people.
Yeah, sure.
Jamie.
I suppose it's a comment or a question really, but which I know you're supposed to ask us. But going back, I mean, the departments that are involved in the SDGs, presumably it's DFID that leads on it. But I would be interested to know how the Department for Education, BIS, in terms of its college and university brief, are mobilising on this, because they've got incredible opportunities to use students, lecturers, academics to input to this. Yeah. And if it's just sat in DFID and not being shared around, that seems like a missed trick.
It's not that bad. We did do an inquiry, and we had the Secretary of State for the Department of International Development here. They are the lead department on this, but we were given reassurances in two regards, that at the Secretary of State level, with other relevant departments, they're kept in the loop on the development of these goals. But just as important, we also got a reassurance that at a European level, because the EU negotiates as a bloc, that the UK Secretary of State was actively engaged with her comparative ministers in other European countries to try and make sure we get, again, the outcome that we as a country would like to see in terms of the 17 goals. Those were the two things we quizzed
kept under review and scrutinised, I think.
Absolutely.
Shay, you wanted to come in.
Or we could to involve more young people to be involved in sustainable environment. Why don't we have a group, a committee that we, like yourselves, have a young person view by getting one person from each region, by using the youth parliament, finding young people from these groups to be part of another committee which feeds back with the agenda that the committee's got, and work with that.
Well, you're a representative of the Youth Parliament, so that's presumably what it's for. And in fact, I was going to ask you, because in your, I suppose it's your manifesto really, as a Youth Parliament, it's interesting, under environment, I was going to just ask you about this because I'm interested. Under environment, you've mentioned renewable energy, we touched on that, but it says here, environment, a greener future for Britain, including the national coordination of recycling. Now, this is a really interesting subject, and so what form do you think that should take?
The recycling bit is that when we go to the parks, we don't see like the recycling bins. Do you know how there is 3 recycling bins area? So there should be plastic, cardboard, and then glass. There isn't that in parks. Why don't we promote that kind of attitude within schools? Schools now have, in my local authority, recycling bins, which promotes it. We promote young people. And I think the perception with young people with recycling is changing. They don't like dropping litter on the floor, and they want to recycle it. It's changing. So we're just working with that society. So oh, if I don't put this in the right bin, it feels awkward for them. So that's why, by promoting some new recycling ways, shall we say, of putting the 3 types of bins that they are into parks, schools, and places around. And I think that could work. And I was talking, but the only reason why local authority can't do that is because of the cuts that they're facing, the budget that the environmental department has. So therefore, because it's expensive to buy the 3 bins layout and to scatter hundreds of them around, it's expensive.
They're funded by the Department of Communities and Local Government to do that. I wondered whether your national coordination point was that Hartlepool does it one way, Sunderland does it another way. I wondered whether you were driving at a bit more uniformity.
I don't think environment's getting driven that much as it should be. Yes, it's in our manifesto, but it's not getting driven to meet that agenda. And it's that because the Youth Parliament, it is in that agenda, the Youth Parliament believes in it, but the young people itself don't think environment is that important than other issues. So other issues get prioritised than the environment.
Just on this, there is a massive problem with inconsistency.
Yeah.
So recycling bins are disappearing because of MRFs, materials recycling facilities, and the problem is the communication's not there. So people think the recycling bins, students, young people think the recycling bins have gone. And we did a project with DEFRA actually. It was part of your reward and recognition fund. We managed to run a project based on our energy efficiency dormitory competition, but on recycling. We managed to increase recycling rates. We actually found that a big barrier was students not knowing, in a key moment of change, not knowing how to recycle or what to recycle because of the inconsistencies. They did it differently at home, different at college, different in the university. I don't think that helps us.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Neil, you wanted to come in?
I just want to ask a couple of questions about the European Union, because I've only just arrived, so you may have covered this already in some detail. But I was just thinking about the interface that you will have with the European Union decision-making processes, because, of course, it has a big remit in the environmental area. So we'd like to comment on that.
No, I think
I don't have a great deal to do.
Yeah, we're not engaged in that formally, although we have informal discussions with the odd European Parliament MP.
Yeah, because that would be a useful interface, wouldn't it? Especially with emerging things like, for example, the European Union's thoughts on having a Europe-wide energy policy, because that's directly connected to the sort of issues you've been covering, and certainly relevant to the question of protecting the environment in terms of promoting more renewables. So what kind of interface or contribution to the debate would you like to have around that subject?
Before you came in, I mentioned that we were setting up, as NUS, is the organisation I'm from, we're setting up an informal alliance of student organisations so that we can work with other student-led organisations in other countries in Europe and beyond to find out what students want, what young people want, so that we can actually get a bigger picture than just what UK students want, which hopefully will allow us to get more of a representative voice working with organisations like the European Students' Union at the EU level.
Right.
Okay.
Any thoughts?
I think with the EU, it's better to have let's work together approach than what you see with all the nations in the EU trying to fight each other a bit. And I think that's a very important thing to work in the future, especially as at the moment within the UK, the EU is being used for electoral purposes. They're saying, oh, we should leave, we shouldn't leave, let's have a referendum, we were supposed to have a referendum and so on. And I feel that the truth about the European Union is not so easily out there for the general public, and they are disinformed and disillusioned about the EU, and they see it as this very negative force when I believe it is not actually.
Okay.
Okay, we've got one last series of questions, so over to Matthew.
This does touch upon some of the comments that you've all made, but back on Valentine's Day, the leaders of the 3 main parties here all committed to seeking a low-carbon economy after the next general election. I don't know if you actually saw that, but if you did, what do you think of that? And do you think it goes far enough?
I think it's one of those issues where it's one of the few issues where when people, young people, everyone can see there's consensus and that they are willing to work together. I think that's one of the few times where people actually go, oh, great, I appreciate that, I respond to that. I think it's great words, I think they're fantastic sentiment. Again, I just wonder whether anything will come of it. Because I do think it signals that the three main parties understand that sustainability and the environment is going to be the next massive issue in politics. But again, whether anything major comes of it, I don't know. Especially, it seems a bit like it's come just before an election.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And a very important point here to make, and it links to what you've said, and also to the Millennium Goals, is that the way they're set out. For example, the first and the most important Millennium Goal, because I'm more aware of this than the low carbon emissions, was to end poverty in all its forms. Mm-hmm. And it has been halved since 1990 to 2010. But there's a loophole, because they described poverty as earning less than $1.25 a day. And when they looked at this, they said, yes, since the number of people who earn less than $1.25 since 1990 has halved by the time of 2010. However, the cost of living had increased. So you can claim this to be a success, but however, how much of a success is? Mm-hmm. And when people take a look at this, a closer look at this, they get that feeling of what's going on. Is it actually working or not? And I think that's a very important thing to consider regarding the low emissions one. It looks brilliant that the parties are willing to collaborate, but the question is that by the next government needs to show that something is happening. It's not just an illusion. Because people will be digging into this, they will be researching, and they will prone.
Okay, Jim.
I think it's great that the parties are working together on it. I think it's a bit late in that not a lot's happened for sort of the last 4 years. It's just it's Valentine's Day and the run up to a general election, and we've got Paris coming up. But I come back to my point earlier around if you really want to engage young people, there's got to be continual, outstanding leadership from politicians on sustainability, because we know that this is an issue that is important to young people because they see it as their future. Just to pick up on one point I said earlier as well, around 60% of students want to learn about sustainability, is what they say in the first year. When you actually unpack that, it's firstly because they're worried about the future, but also they see it as an opportunity because they see 1 million unemployed young people and they think it will help them get a job with all the green growth and green economy talk that there is. And actually, the positivity is a side that we don't often see coming up. And I think a critique of the environmental movement is it's very often negative, and negative does not engage. So it's nice when politicians come out and say something positive, even if it is quite late.
Okay. Do you
They agree with what they have done by combining the three major parties to actually pledge on one thing that they all agree on, that 60% of the US citizens believe that they should be taught. By showing that they are working together as one team, as one people to actually fight for the future of young people. In the environmental terms, we want to cut down as much as we can before you get to power. Mm-hmm. And I totally agree with it.
Okay.
But we just want to see something out of it rather than just a pledge.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, Jamie, Paris obviously coming up. Where do you think after this commitment, this pledge made by the three leaders, where do you think it places the UK in terms of the leadership stakes, shall we say, as part of the Paris negotiations? Does it place us at the forefront?
Yes. Well, all eyes really are on the UK because of the Climate Change Act and our historic leadership on the issues. I think with Copenhagen, a lot of people got their hopes up high and everyone was kind of said, well, if it doesn't happen now, we're doomed. And then it didn't happen. So I think certainly from the student activists I talked to, they're playing down Paris because they were bitten last time round and they're not overly optimistic. But it needs to happen. There needs to be a good agreement to come out from it. But I was meeting with people on the planet just this morning, and they were talking about their concerns about the coal industry and the fossil industry and the power of the lobby. And that is still a concern with activists, that no matter how willing politicians are, ultimately they'll be steered by by business gain or by political interest or short-term thinking over the long-term brave decisions that need to be made. And I actually think that young people will support a politician to make a long-term difficult decision on sustainability or climate change. They'll have the full backing. And in fact, I think it will engage and impassion, embolden students to do more and to go out and vote more. I don't think politicians need to be worried about this in terms of their electoral successes.
Okay. Any further comments on that?
Yeah, Calin. Can I just pursue this joint deal on joint agreement to work together on climate change goals? And by the way, the actual agreement includes to work together to sort carbon budgets out, the 5-year budgets that go forward up to 2050, and also to phase coal out as a main fuel, particularly polluting fuel, obviously in the energy economy. But all that is almost a series of goals whereby the attainment of the goal is actually if nothing changes, as opposed to bad changes resulting from not doing anything about it. So what we've talked about this afternoon is particularly the question of young people being able to see that something actually happens as a result of their engagement. How might one ally that long-term, I think absolutely essential goal, and essentially having to say to people, right, we've got to do this and we've got to stick at it over a very long period of time, and then the results will be perhaps more or less what we hope they'll be or at a point where actually all the young people who are involved in it won't be young people anymore. So how do we make that difference in terms of allying that long-term joint endeavour with significant milestones and wins which actually can secure that engagement?
Just from our perspective, we're seeing the work that we're doing sort of a long-term social project, really. So embedding sustainability in the formal and the informal curriculum, things like the Students' Green Fund, we're trying to make sure that when young people and students leave tertiary education, they turn out, as I mentioned, as part of the solution to these problems. So they might not be the next Prime Minister for another 10, 15 years, but some of the students going through education now will go on that are involved in our programmes, that have had a decent education, that get this issue in a critical thinking global citizenship perspective. They will go on to positions of authority, running businesses, running education, running government. So I think sort of the issue comes really with the short-term leadership, because arguably, tertiary education, the education system has failed us because a lot of the current political leaders, business leaders, educational leaders don't quite get it in the way that they need to. So there's a short-term gap where we need politicians to step up and take the leadership that's required. But the hope is that ultimately, through education and the work that organisations like ours do, we'll be able to ensure that future leaders get this agenda and are willing to take the political leadership that's required.
Yeah, James was talking about leadership and the short term that government only has 5-year terms in Parliament unless they get re-elected. With that pledge that they have made with all three political parties, if they work together as they have pledged, surely the leadership could be the same. With having the same leadership means a long-term plan, and everything would go smoothly because nothing would change because the parties has changed. Everything will be as they have planned a few years ago. So the long term comes in.
And no, Calin. And on your point about by the time this reaches its deadline, the people who are now young people will no longer be young people. With climate change, it's something that I think if you get involved in it, it doesn't go away, because it's always there, and especially as it's going to be very hard to get rid of it and revert climate change. A lot of research is still being done on it, and so far no ideas on how that could be possibly done. So it would actually be better, because if you get the young people now involved, when they will be 30, they will try and get their young people involved, and it will continue, and it will become a natural process. And this natural process of politics outside politics will also have spillage into politics, with more young people wanting to become part of the traditional political system.
I also think that it's not just about those goals you're talking about. I mean, in a lot of the reports I read about this, people were saying that this issue could be as dangerous to our national security and economic resilience as terrorism. So I think, yeah, you might not have a massive win with it, but at the same time, you don't want a massive loss with it either. So I think young people will respond to it. Because if you do keep those goals, fair enough, yeah, it's not a glamorous, massive win, but it's also about not making the levels go above that. So if you keep it there, you have kind of won. So, and I think young people do want to take a lead in that. Because as you say, young people are the people that this is going to get passed on to, and then when we're not young people anymore, we'll pass it on to the next generation. So it is a cyclical thing, I think, and it's not just about those goals, it's about other things in the economy and security.
I mean, I think some of what I'm driving at is what we mentioned very much earlier in the discussion, is the question, I can't see the point, this doesn't involve me, or it is so enormous that, well, what can I do about it? I'll get on with, going out for the evening. Or
I think one of the good things about environmental issues and sustainability is that most young people do think, well, this is about me. It does involve me. There are certain things, if you look at Treasury committees and other things, they think, well, that's nothing to do with me. Business committee, that's nothing to do with me. I think young people do, by and large, think green issues and sustainability issues are to do with them, because it's got to a stage now where it has to be. Otherwise, what's the alternative? We just keep going down. They'll be going down now.
However, in a sense, I might add that this happened naturally, because we've seen the effect. We're starting to see the effects of climate change, and so young people are waking up by their own. So what would be very important to see is actual campaigns and posters, and trying to get the young people involved, because then they will be bombarded with the information. So they think, okay, this is an issue. I am part of it. I should do something.
Right. Alternatively, if you do nothing, you've made the decision already.
It's part of it as well about sometimes people take action for the sake of taking action, rather than from the point of view that action is really important. And at the stage when the understanding about climate change and what is needed becomes something that is just so all-embracing and so pertinent that it cannot be ignored. It's how you actually get that understanding before you reach that stage, really.
Well, it's quite hard because, to be honest, young people right now are concerned about their future lives. And as you said, with the NUS study, housing and employability are the first two things. So obviously, as a young person, you're thinking, okay, what am I doing with my life? You want to go into university, but university costs £9,000 a year. So you have to take that into consideration. If you cannot afford it, then you need loans. If you need loans, then you'll need a job afterwards. So it's all this pressure on young people to get a job. So that's why they don't have the luxury that other generations had. Because I discuss this with my lecturers all the time. 30 years ago, 20 years ago, which is not that much of a time, young people would be very radical in their political views. Today, they're not so much. And you've seen that in an increase of conservative values among youth. And that's because they don't want to think about radical things. They want to think, okay, how do I get a job? What do I do with my life? So the better we tackle this financial aspect, or we make climate change part of this financial aspect, so, jobs in the region, the more young people will look towards it.
Yeah, there should be more jobs. We know that there is more jobs within sustainability and environment. There is jobs there, such as the nuclear power station, such as going to the steel factories. There are jobs there for young people. And as that, Hartlepool power station, we have got a nuclear power station, it generates £33 million. It's got over 10,000 employees. Yeah, but the expiry date of that is 2024. So the expiry date of the nuclear power is 2024, which means that 10,000 people will lose their jobs unless we build another nuclear power station, which is cost efficient, which is eco-friendly, which we plan something out and then gives back to the community, generates the money it needs, and then nothing will work out with that, with the young people being more involved within the environment.
Just to sort of reinforce the message of hope, but 60% of young people want to learn about sustainability, but we also ask a separate question in that NUSHEA survey, and consistently over the last 4 years, a majority of young people are willing to sacrifice £3,000 from their starting salary. This is before the £9,000 hike and subsequently after, to work for a company either in an ethical environmental role or a company that takes seriously ethical environmental issues. So they're willing to, even though they're graduating with 60 grand's worth of debt, they're still willing to sacrifice the money because they believe this is important to them.
That came out very strongly in the launch of a sustainability report here last night, that the businesses that contributed to it said that your generation of employees are pushing business hard on its sustainability credentials and the ethics of the business. When being interviewed, they're asking, are you paying all your taxes? So some good... So I think that people are radical, but in a different way. I think probably the mythical radicalisation goes back to about 1968, which was even before my time.
It wasn't before mine.
And that was when the students took the street in Paris and elsewhere. I think each successive generation has its key issues. For my generation, it was the Cold War. For your generation, it's climate change. Big issues that we have to engage with that can, as Alan said, be off-putting, because what little bit can I do in face of all that? But of course the answer is everybody can live individually in a more sustainable way, and that builds up. But big decisions like whether or not to renew the power stations cross more than one generation. And Shay is absolutely right about that. A decision that our generation of politicians has made to renew the nuclear power capacity in this country is something which will impact heavily on your own generation in terms of the energy mix.
Just one point as well, in terms of getting students sort of along a progression pathway to more activism. So we do an awful lot engaging students through our programmes. We've got fantastic reach and lots of success in getting them to do bits of programme. But we're conscious that we don't necessarily ask them to critically think about some of the bigger challenges. So for the first time ever, we're holding a national Student Sustainability Summit this March at Leeds, on the 23rd of March. Any of you are welcome to come along if you want, for 200 students who have worked with us, to challenge them to think about, through some workshops, some of the bigger issues. So Paris and COP is one.
Yep.
We've got some French students coming over for that. Behaviour change, institutional change and curriculum reform, all the way through to food issues, population as well, and how population links into the climate change debate. And we've got a couple of amazing keynote speakers. So it might be nice if, I don't know if one of the committee could come along.
We're 23rd of March.
In Leeds, you'll be most welcome, as any of you three will as well.
Sure. I've just got one eye on the clock now because we're about to move to a vote in the House of Commons. But I think in a way we've almost perhaps come full circle, and in a way the latter comments I think relate to a report that this committee did on well-being, and really looking at GDP and looking at the ways in which it's not just about GDP, it's actually about well-being and how one measures that quality of life as well, and how the environment fits into that. So I think we've covered a lot of ground, and we certainly wanted to take the views of the younger generation, that generation, your generation, in terms of how our report is taken further. So can I thank each of you for taking the trouble and appearing before the Environmental Audit Subcommittee today. Thank you very much indeed. Order.